What's a good word, everyone? It's your boy DKB here. I just want to say thanks for all the support. The channel's been steadily growing, and the number you see below, you can drop a text, shoot a voicemail, any ideas, topics, collabs, etc. you guys want to see. I'll include them in future videos and live streams, and I'll catch you again. Be easy. What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here, and as promised, I found the most up-to-date list possible for offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, and former head coaches that the New York Jets have formally put in a head coach interview request for. And there's a lot of names that we've known about for some time now, officially in the works, but there's also new names on here. And just taking a quick shot at this list, there are a number of guys with former head coach experience, which we know is a preference for this for this organization at this point in time. But a lot of it is on the defensive side. So we'll have to see how that pans out. And I want to run through the names real quick. And then I'll just highlight some of the newer ones that, I haven't personally discussed or talked about just yet and share some of my thoughts. So we have Chiefs offensive coordinator Matt Nagy coming in. Broncos defensive coordinator Vance Joseph. We have Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn. Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores. Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady, and Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Slowik. So I'm super excited about a lot of the offensive names that I've heard for sure. I've talked a pretty significant amount about Aaron Glenn as a prime candidate here, but to highlight some of the guys that we're just kind of hearing about or that I wasn't necessarily overly hyped with before, but I guess it's kind of been expected that we should have seen the name. So to kick it off, we have Chiefs offensive coordinator Matt Nagy, right? A former Bears head coach. Does have playoff experience, although he did lose both of his trips to the playoffs when he was with the Bears. But I put him kind of in that Rex Ryan category, right? With some of these franchises that have had long-standing, valleys of failure, if you will, having reached a pinnacle of playoffs is still a huge achievement for any head coach. Prior Chiefs offensive coordinator before he returned, and then he ended up effectively kind of having to work his way back up via quarterback coach, and then ultimately getting back to where he is now as the offensive coordinator. But it's interesting with Nagy because you can't really find a ton of people that would be excited about bringing him on board as their head coach, not just for the New York Jets, but overall across the league. And even tapping into some Chiefs fans, the common perception that I get is that a lot of people feel the magic is Andy Reid and is Patrick Mahomes, right? Matt Nagy, your Eric Bieniemy, for example, they had very little to do in the way of the success of the franchise. And so from that standpoint, I can't imagine how we're supposed to get extremely hyped about it, even though they've seen a ton of success. And it takes more than just two pieces to get that done, right? So there's a level of credit that is due to him, but I understand the sentiment, right? And so really one of the only pluses that I can think of when kind of racking my brain is that if you pull a Matt Nagy and you end up deciding to bring him, then you are possibly looking at a lot of those extended connections from the Chiefs also coming with them, right? Position coaches, etc. So maybe that kind of helps smooth things over, but ultimately I still think it's probably a moot point talking with him. The next name here is Broncos DC Vance Joseph. Now, he's done a ridiculous job since joining Sean Payton and getting this Broncos defense to really, I don't know if overachieve is the word, but when you look at the development, when you look at even there's like a 5-week span where they were like the worst defense in the NFL, and still they're a top 10 unit, right? And they've led the league in sacks, the third in points allowed. They've led the NFL in EPA per play as well, which is expected points above average, something along those lines. But former Cardinals defensive coordinator experience, actually was the Broncos head coach back in 2017, I believe. And again, aside from the statistical production and looking at them getting into the playoffs, and when you have a rookie quarterback, I think unless they just play out of their mind, you do look at the defense as kind of the crux, right? The anchor of what helped lead a playoff charge. And I think that's definitely true in this case. And Sean Payton has given him his roses as well. But I look at the player development as a huge thing, right? Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, Zach Allen, Riley Moss, Brandon Jones, PJ Locke, just some of the names that have been able to take huge steps under Vance Joseph, and let alone you have the likes of, Pat Surtain that's continuing to see a consistent level of success while still looking like, the cream of the crop in the cornerback ring. So you have to be excited about at least bringing him in and seeing what he can contribute to immediately turning this defense around. And I don't know what kind of offensive staff he could build. I'm not sure what the connections look like off the top of my head. I wouldn't necessarily be excited per se, just thinking about who he was with the Cardinals, for example, and the Broncos back then. But we'll have to play it by ear and see. Again, head coach experience being a huge plus for him. Next on the list is Vikings DC Brian Flores. Now, former Dolphins head coach, of course. This is his first interview since his discriminatory hiring lawsuit after being ousted by the Dolphins and then not really getting any kind of significant look after the fact. And even last year when he had a ton of success with the Vikings, he didn't have any real kind of hype about him becoming a head coach again, which many people thought was weird, which also flared up the lawsuit stuff again. But when you look at what he's done, I mean, it speaks for itself, right? Him and Vance Joseph, there's the defensive coordinators, I feel like, get a lot more consistent hype than what you see out of offensive coordinators, right? If you're not in that Ben Johnson tier, or if you haven't contributed to a significant enough turnaround, right? Or you don't really get the same kind of excitement. So speaking of which, when it comes to Brian Flores, one of the huge things that are going to stick out is I don't want to see a drop-off in linebacker play for us. And the defensive scheme that he runs, a ton of quarters, cover two, all different types of variations, and then just the aggressive linebacker play. I mean, we talked about picking up Jamin Davis, for example, which was only available because they cut him for the more aggressive Ivan Pace Jr. So this is a guy that's not scared to make moves just based on pedigree and stuff. And again, just his defense is very chaotic, right? If you guys want to know a little bit more in depth about what has made his scheme so successful this year, I would recommend checking out the Bootleg podcast. They did a great job of breaking down the Palms coverage that you see them in, how they're utilizing their linebackers, what the secondary play on the back end looks like, to really give you guys a little bit more of an in-depth look. But this is another guy that's, from a personality standpoint, I would say is intriguing, right? But he's definitely a no-nonsense. You kind of see it on his face, right? He has he has that angry dad face that just lets you know, if the look gets flashed to you, you better straighten up immediately. So there's been a level of accountability with his teams, the aggressiveness you always love, and just seeing the consistent ability for his defenses to perform is huge. So we'll see how it shakes out. It kind of feels like in this early going of seeing the list of names that have come out, it feels like, our head coach, our next head coach, is probably going to be a defensive specialist. And I imagine that the options that are weighed will depend heavily on who was able to speak to building an offensive staff the best. So we'll see how that plans out and how it plays out moving forward. One thing to keep in mind as well here is that none of these guys, as far as I know, none of these guys have accepted the interview. So it is a mutual two-way communication here, right? We'll put out the request. I'm not sure if teams can necessarily decline them themselves, but the individuals themselves can, right? And so we'll see what happens. But let me know what you guys think about the list. Who stands out to you? What are your thoughts? And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.